Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Oscar Wilde's play, An Ideal Husband. This play is unique among all of the Oscar Wilde that I've ever read in my life, in that it's not good. So Oscar Wilde is an amazing writer. Was an amazing writer. Obviously, he's no longer alive. He was so clever and so witty, so funny. Sorry. He had this amazing satirical ability. And if you told me that An Ideal Husband was written by a third-rate playwright doing their Oscar Wilde impression, I'd believe it. It really just is not good in this really startling way for people who are, I think, for at least for me. I don't know if I want to speculate about for other people, but based on everything else that I've read by Wilde, his plays, Importance of Being Earnest, and Lady Windermere's Fan primarily, his novels, his essays, he's this brilliant, funny, satiric writer with this amazing social awareness. And this play just isn't. It is so bland and boring and just plodding that it's painful to get through. So the basic plot, I'm not even going to give you a detailed plot summary. I don't think it's worth it, if I'm honest. The plot revolves around this blackmail scheme where this woman, Mrs. Cleverly. Right, I find the right bit here. Cheveley. Sorry. So Mrs. Cheveley is blackmailing this guy, Sir Robert Chiltern, because he had he basically passed on state secrets to this guy who was a mutual acquaintance of theirs in Vienna in exchange for a lot of money, and that money launched his fortune and his political career. Robert Chiltern is now married to Lady Chiltern, and so when Mrs. Cheveley shows up and is like, hey, I'm blackmailing you, basically there's not that much that Robert can do about it, for the seemingly really bland, contrived reason that his wife thinks he's absolutely perfect and morally upright in every way and has never done a single bad thing ever in his life, and that if it turned out he ever had done a single bad thing in his life, she would reject him entirely and no longer love him. So Robert is stuck between if he doesn't give in to Mrs. Cheveley's blackmail, then his career will likely be destroyed by this scandal. He will be forced from society, etc., etc. Versus, on the other hand, if he gives in and does what she wants, his wife will be like, oh, you have betrayed your ethics, and that's the thing I loved about you. You're dead to me. That's the whole fucking thing that's really important. That's the whole central plot line. It's a very, very boring plot line, realistically. There's also long scenes of just conversation about society and about people, and this is where it really gets rough, because normally when Oscar Wilde gives us long scenes of people just chatting about society, it's full of wit. It's so funny and clever and insightful. Wilde's writing is usually like a diamond with just a perfect foil against it, right? It just sparkles and dazzles with light. Here, somebody has taken coarse sandpaper to that diamond and then covered it in soot. Like, you can still tell that there's the base of a diamond there, but it doesn't reflect. It doesn't function right? Um, it's just so bland and boring and painful. The wit, the aphorisms just aren't there. I mean, again, in my video about Lady Windermere's Fan, I pointed this out. There's one section in this collection where we got a 2-page section. We have 4 of Wilde's most famous quotable aphorisms within 2 pages. Here, nothing. An Ideal Husband is very unquotable. It is the most unquotable thing by Wilde I have ever read in my life. But there is one thing that I found really interesting in the writing, and that was the descriptions of characters. So, different time periods in dramaturgical history, and the way that people write drama, have different approaches, different standards, different ways of describing things like characters and settings. In the late Victorian era into the Edwardian era, so late 19th, early 20th century, you had a lot of playwrights who started writing much more novelistic descriptions of things, right? People like Bernard Shaw just write these very long, detailed descriptions of what exactly the stage should look like, how characters should be dressed, etc., etc. And Wilde does that as well. He's in that tradition, he's in this time period, right? But the descriptions of characters here are so bizarre that if I'm thinking about it from a director's perspective or an actor's perspective, like, I don't know what to do with much of this. So I want to read you a number of these, because I think they are really actually fascinating. So, the first person we get a description of is Lady Chiltern. At the top of the staircase stands Lady Chiltern, a woman of grave Greek beauty, about 27 years of age. Okay, fine. Cool. That's actually workable. We find an attractive actress on the Grecian model. Late 20s. Perfect. You're good. Set. Okay, whatever. But then it starts getting a little bit weirder. In that same set of stage directions, that opening description, Mrs. Marchmont and Lady Basildon, 2 very pretty women, are seated together on a Louis Seize sofa. They are types of exquisite fragility. Their affection of manner has a delicate charm. Watteau would have loved to paint them. Now, I don't know who Watteau is. I think there's probably an explanatory note, but I don't care that much. What does that mean? What does that part mean? 2 very pretty women. Okay, good. Seated on a sofa. Good. I can do that. I can stage that. I can cast that. Whatever it is. Types of exquisite fragility. Maybe that's performable. Their affectation of manner has a delicate charm. Sure. You can make them very graceful, something like this. Great. As an actor, you can do that. Cool. Next. The Vicomte de Nangis, a young attaché known for his neckties and his Anglomania, approaches with a low bow and enters into conversation. You can put him in neckties, but this is the late Victorian era. Everybody's going to be in neckties. Every guy who shows up on stage is going to be in a necktie. How do we establish that the Vicomte is known for his neckties? Enter Lord Caversham, an old gentleman of 70, wearing the riband and star of the Garter, fine wig type, rather like a portrait by Lawrence. Okay, maybe. I mean, old gentleman of 70, sure, you can cast somebody who's around 70, perfect. Put him in a costume, ribbon and star of the Garter, great. Fine wig type, what does that actually mean? Probably in the 1890s, that would be meaningful. It isn't necessarily today. And of course, rather like a portrait by Lawrence. Sure. Again, you look that reference up, you figure out who that is. Maybe you can do something. But then it starts to get real weird. Mabel Chiltern. This is the one that I find, I think, most upsetting and disturbing out of all of these. In part because of the weird way that she's depicted, but there's some other odd character descriptions as well. Mabel Chiltern is a perfect example of the English type of prettiness, the apple blossom type. She has all the fragrance and freedom of a flower. There is ripple after ripple of sunlight in her hair, and the little mouth with its parted lips is expectant like the mouth of a child. She has the fascinating tyranny of youth and the astonishing courage of innocence. To sane people, she is not reminiscent of any work of art, but she is really like a Tanagra statuette, and would be rather annoyed if she were told so. What? If I'm directing this play, what the fuck am I doing with that? If I'm the actor playing Mabel Chiltern, what the fuck am I doing with that? That is not useful stuff at all. That is possibly good imagery, but I actually don't even think it's good imagery. I think it's a little bit creepy, the way that he's describing her mouth and stuff like this. But what do you do with that? Like, the idea of stage directions is that they tell you how to perform a play or what a character is about. This is not usable material from a performance standpoint. And we continue getting these weird character descriptions. Enter Lady Markby and Mrs. Cheveley. Lady Markby is a pleasant, kindly, popular woman with grey hair a la Marquise and good lace. Mrs. Cheveley, who accompanies her, is tall and rather slight, lips very thin and highly colored, a line of scarlet on a pallid face. Venetian red hair, aquiline nose, and long throat. Rouge accentuates the natural paleness of her complexion, gray-green eyes that move restlessly. She is in heliotrope with diamonds. She looks rather like an orchid and makes great demands on one's curiosity. In all her movements she is extremely graceful, a work of art on the whole, but showing the influence of too many schools. So that actually is useful. Like, that tells you about the character's makeup, that tells you about the costume, the fashion that the character is in, so I don't have as much of a problem with that. But then we get Robert Chiltern, and we're back to this, here's a bunch of novelistic type information about this character that is not really stageable in my view. Again, some of which is stageable, some of which is useful. So Robert Chiltern enters, a man of 40, but looking somewhat younger, clean-shaven with finely cut features, dark hair and dark-eyed, a personality of mark. Not popular, few personalities are, but intensely admired by the few and deeply respected by the many. The note of his manner is that of perfect distinction with a slight touch of pride. One feels that he is conscious of the success he has made in life. A nervous temperament with a tired look. The firmly chiseled mouth and chin contrast strikingly with the romantic expression in the deep-set eyes. The variance is suggestive of an almost complete separation of passion and intellect, as though thought and emotion were each isolated in its own sphere through some violence of willpower. There is nervousness in the nostrils and in the pale, thin, pointed hands. It would be inaccurate to call him picturesque. Picturesqueness cannot survive the House of Commons, but Van Dyck would have liked to have painted his head. Yeah, I mean, again, some of that is useful in terms of putting together a performance. A lot of it's just weird. A lot of it is, again, it's the kind of thing that you can put into a novel and describe a character when we are calling them up in our mind, right? When we are imagining that character. When you have a real actor with a physical body who has to bring this character to the stage, things like Van Dyck would have liked to have painted his head is not helpful. So yeah, I mean that's the thing with an ideal husband. It is I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. It is such a weird bad version of the kinds of things that Wilde typically does so incredibly well.